Hey everybody, welcome back to Gator Truth. Today we're talking with Landon from the My Dogs Are Barking podcast, and he's here to talk to us about the Mississippi State Bulldogs. How are you doing today, Landon?
Man, Daniel, I tell you what, man, as we're sitting here, this kind of almost kind of the later half of July, and everybody's listening and watching right now, you're all kind of in the same spot where we're just kind of waiting around. I mean, we are just begging for college football to start. And the good news is, man, we make it through another, 8 or 9 days, and all of a sudden we're in the month of August, and that is when college football happens. So there's just an emergence of hope of just clinging on to the fact that there's not too much longer until college football, man.
For sure, and I cannot wait for fall camp to start when we start finding out who the teams really are, because of course we can project who teams are all we want, through the off season and as we get to camp. But once camp happens, that's when we sometimes find out that hey, there's this guy possibly starting that we didn't even think would start. Or unfortunately, like Florida in 2008 national title year, you've got one of our top players going down in camp. Hopefully that doesn't happen to any team this year. But fall camp is where everything really gets rolling for good, for bad, whatever. But with that said, we're here to talk about your Bulldogs. Jeff Lebby, second year, of course, last year, not the best debut year, but what's it look like going into year two?
Yeah, well, you mentioned it, Daniel. 2-10, man, just a really rough season for Mississippi State, the worst season since 2003. And it was paired with the second toughest schedule, but the schedule this season is just a little bit easier. And when I say a little bit easier, I mean it is the sixth toughest. And so it's basically the same schedule, just kind of flip. So the away games are now home and vice versa. And Jeff Lebby's got a very tough task ahead of him. In fact, the Vegas over under odds is 3.5 for Mississippi State, which is a remarkably sad thing to say out loud. But whenever you start lining up, the schedule, it kind of starts to make sense. Mississippi State, even out of conference, has Arizona State, who just made the college football playoff, coming to Starkville, which it will be helpful with that it's a home game. But that's before you even get to the SEC. I'm going to say the G word, gauntlet. And Mississippi State has to deal with that. So I think for a lot of state fans, you got to kind of start thinking, what's the best case scenario? What's the worst case scenario? Well, the worst case scenario is not much harder to imagine because they just kind of almost went through it last year. The best case scenario for Mississippi State, if they can find a way to go 5-7, I think that would be really impressive because that would mean that you will have had at least two SEC wins in the SEC, and there's no, with all due respect to Vanderbilt, and Vanderbilt's not an easy W anymore. There's no Vanderbilts or Kentuckies on that list, so that would be impressive. 6-6, I think that might be coach of the year kind of territory. But the good news is, Jeff Lebby does have Blake Shapen coming back, and also a 60 new total players here in the last little bit. So it's not the same team. So hopefully some of those guys they got in the portal and the signees will make some sort of difference. But they'd have to, right? 2 wins, you can at least get to 3 with new players, right?
Well, that definitely is the hope. If it makes you feel better, 2-10, you did just as well as what some people call blue blood, Florida State University. So hey, you've got that going for you, right?
You had to sneak that one in there, didn't you? I understand.
Oh, I did. I'm sure I'm about to get Plant the Spears Jesse sending me a text like, I can't believe you dropped this on me. It's like, I had to. Why not? But yes, you're talking about the gauntlet that you have for listeners not necessarily familiar with Mississippi State's SEC schedule. It is very similar. You switch Florida for Mississippi State, and then the only teams that are really different, you switch Arkansas for Kentucky, which based on last year, that might be a tougher draw in Arkansas. And then LSU and Missouri, which I'd say LSU, especially this year in Death Valley, is harder than a trip to the plains. But I only bring this up because Gator fans are very familiar with the gauntlet that we have. And when they're probably hearing you say 3.5, talking about a gauntlet, they're probably thinking, oh, it's the same as what can't be as bad as what we go through. And I'm like, well, I think it may be worse. I mean, you're talking about a team that has back-to-back road games at in Aggie land, then the swamp, and then you have a home game, but it's Texas. And so not exactly the easiest thing there. Oh, and I forgot. You host the Vols before the trip to Aggie land, which I mean, in Jeff Lebby year 2, and I've know we've talked before about Levy taking over a crazy program that's gone back and forth for a few years. Um, so I've got to say that 3.5 getting above it, not trying to be negative. I think that would be a very impressive feat because that means you've taken care of at least 3 of your your non-conference schedule, and you've pulled one off in arguably the toughest SEC gauntlet that there is. So, what
Yeah,
can you tell me about that? Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
you're exactly right. And at the end of the day, like if Mississippi State's going to be a part of the SEC, this is just what it's going to be. It can't be a hopeless outlook on every year. They're going to have to get somebody. And I was talking on we had our Tennessee preview a couple weeks back, and I mentioned that if there's any sort of game that I think State has an opportunity to get someone, I think it's Tennessee. Now, this does not Tennessee has much more talent than Mississippi State. However, that's a game last season that was close. I mean, it's a 10-point game all the way through the fourth quarter. And Mississippi State just could not move the ball offensively. Michael Van Buren really struggled in that game. And their starting quarterback obviously was injured against Florida in the fourth game, Blake Shapen. So he comes back. The X factor is a guy named Camario Taylor, and Camario Taylor is one of the best players in Mississippi last year. He's actually been committed to Mississippi State for several years. But he's a top 70 overall player, and I got the chance to cover spring practice, and even just seeing him, he looks the part. The other guy that transferred in is former 5-star Luke Cromenhawk from Florida State. So there's a lot more depth in the quarterback room in case Shapen goes down or if he starts to struggle. The best thing I think for Mississippi State is the running game. So Davon Booth really came on towards the later half of the season at 800 yards last year, an average about 5 per carry. However, the big addition, the best player that Mississippi State got in the transfer portal is a guy who might have, maybe a top 10 best names in college football. His name's Fluff Bothwell. Fantastic name. Even better
Fantastic.
player. 7.5 yards per carry as a true freshman at South Alabama last season. And he's a guy that he was a 3-star, didn't have a lot of offers. And you know how these guys are. He really came on strong and led the Sun Belt in rushing touchdowns with 13 as a true freshman. Again, 7.5 yards per carry. So now having those two guys back and forth, the only reason I bring them up is because if you're a team like Mississippi State that does not have the overall talent as other teams have, you have to be able to run the ball and hold the ball in order to pull off some of these upsets. Last season, Mississippi State really struggled running the ball in the first half of the season. The later half, they really turned it on. But because of that, they were getting behind the line of scrimmage or getting runs that would go almost nowhere. And now you're in third and long situations and having issues. So one incomplete pass, and you're punting it off. And the defense really struggled last year. We can get into that as well. But that's kind of the big thing is hopefully the running game is going to be able to help out Mississippi State. That's what Mississippi State fans are hoping for.
Yeah, and definitely. And think I even mentioned on my guest spot on the Longhorns podcast that one of the things, you're talking about the offense, they asked the question, what's one team you may try to play in NCAA that is not the Gators? And I said, honestly, possibly Mississippi State. They said one of the options is a program that needs rebuilding. I said, I think Jeff Lebby's a fun offensive coordinator, and one of the things we love to do is, or you love to do when you play these games is have a fun offense to try and play with. And so, definitely, you're talking about these new weapons. Do you see a lot better offense coming in year 2 of Jeff Lebby?
I really do. As I explained the running game, but the other part of that is the wide receivers that Jeff Lebby brought in. Now, The best receiver on Mississippi State last year was Kevin Coleman, who really, really was an outstanding wide receiver. He's a third team overall SEC wide receiver this year, but he transferred home to go to Missouri. So State was really left in a bind on who they have. Jordan Mosley's coming back. This is his fourth year in the program, and he's kind of a solid, but he's not really a good over the top kind of guy. Aiden Williams is a transfer wide receiver from Ole Miss, who's a big body, showed a lot of promise at Ole Miss, but could not crack the lineup. And obviously, they have several talented guys there at Ole Miss. But he comes to Mississippi State. Anthony Evans III, who is a wide receiver from Georgia, comes over to Mississippi State. A lot of speed, but has had some injuries. Brennan Thompson, who was at Oklahoma and Texas, comes to Mississippi State. And overall, there's 16 new players between transfer portal and recruits. So you would think at this point, with the amount of overhaul on the roster, there's got to be some things to be excited about. Just because, think about Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State. He's kind of like, if you're going to look at someone as an example for who you'd like to look at, you look at him. They went 3-9 in their first season, really struggled. He flipped their entire roster over and had 59 new players, and all of a sudden, they're in the college football playoff. Now, I'm not saying that because Mississippi State's going to do that, but you can kind of see the comparison. When you flip an entire roster over, you don't have the same players remembering, we lost in that close game last season, or we're used to losing here. With the transfer portal, it can be good for teams like Mississippi State, because now you're getting players who have been successful on a lower level, can hopefully bring that winning culture into Starkville, because, man, they need it.
Now, you talked about lower level bringing their success up. Do you have any guys who came in that maybe, I know you brought up Kromanok and you brought up the guy from Ole Miss. Do you have any more or do you have any that maybe had a little bit of success at perhaps a bigger name school that said, no, I want to go to Mississippi State and be the featured guy?
That's a very good question. Very, very good question. From the transfers for guys that came in last season, again, there's a lot of lower level guys. I mean, I could run through so many. Anthony Evans is a guy who I mentioned briefly, but he was at Georgia, and same thing, could not crack the lineup at Georgia. He was good he could do some kick returning kind of stuff, but in terms of kind of being the feature slot receiver, could not do it. He's a guy that I'm looking forward to seeing, because he has a lot of speed. Now, can he stay healthy? That's a big question. But in terms of bigger schools, the only real other guys I can think of that kind of off the top of my head is two. There's two defenders. One's Jalen Smith, the linebacker from Tennessee. He honestly had a lot of promise this season, and I was a little surprised when he entered the portal, because Tennessee was headed to the playoff. And it wasn't like he wasn't playing. I mean, he was contributing, but I guess wanted to go ahead and get in, while the getting was good. So he's one guy. And then the other guy is Jure Bledsoe, who is the defensive tackle from Texas. He's huge. And he's a guy that I think State fans are going to kind of look for on the defensive line. Listen to this, Daniel. Last year, Mississippi State's this is not a joke. Mississippi State's defense as a whole had 6 sacks. So not one person had 6 sacks, not two. The entire defense had 6 sacks. It was such a low point. There was no pressure on the quarterback. And regardless, I mean, everyone listening knows this. No matter how good your defenders are, if the quarterback's got all day to throw, eventually somebody somewhere is going to get open. So Mississippi State heavily addressed the transfer portal with guys that had been somewhere, like Malik Silla, who's the former 4-star from Texas A&M. Did not work out there, so he is coming to Starkville. And then there is a ton of lower level guys that had success. Rasheed Evans at Northern Illinois, Whitson from Coastal Carolina, Colin Coates from Charlotte. So all these people I'm naming, you've never heard of, and I never heard of either, because they're from lower level schools. But they had some success, and at this point, Mississippi State's just trying to bring in enough guys for something to work. And here's the last thing I'll say about it. In December, Jeff Lebby, this is not a joke. Jeff Lebby called a guy that was working overnight at a warehouse to come play defensive line. Now, it's not just some random guy working at Amazon. He was Jamil Burrows, who used to be at Alabama and contributed, and things just didn't work out there, and he just wasn't playing football anymore. Jeff Lebby called him and asked, "Hey, would you be interested?" And the things we're hearing out of camp is that he's actually going to play a big role. He's a very talented guy. I mean, being on the defensive line at Alabama is no joke. It just didn't work out for a variety of reasons. But as you can just kind of hear, State is trying everything they can, even getting folks that are working other jobs. I mean, you never know. The guy who's stocking things at Target at night might be sacking a quarterback in September. Who knows?
Yeah, and you know what? Maybe he's taking advantage of the second chance not many people get. So that'll be a cool story from the outside to keep an eye on for
Yeah,
sure.
that's a guy that everybody wants to root for. Because like, what a cool story if he actually ends up doing good. Everybody would be excited about that.
Yeah, and I've got to say, I had to look it up since you said 6 total sacks. I'm like, I wonder how many we gave up because, of course, going into the game with you guys last year, we had, you know, not a great offensive line day against Miami. We had not had a great offensive line day against A&M, and then we go to Starkville. And you're right, we didn't give up a sack in that game, which I was like, wow. And I know that game, unfortunately, a lot of fans left at the half, but then in the second half, that became a 7 point game and a turnover away from it being tied. And then, of course, after that, Florida runs away with it. But it's definitely, I think I said to you afterwards was, hey, I think you guys can definitely compete. And then you did go compete in Knoxville and a few other places, but it was just the weird place that you guys were in year one. So I'm very excited to see what you guys have coming up this year. If there's anything else you'd like to tell the listeners about Mississippi State in 2025, what would it be?
Man, I tell you, I think what would be a fun game is for listeners if you're a someone that likes to kind of think about the odds, to look at Mississippi State's schedule, but just because I've had a good time doing, I mean, not a good time. Good time's very relative, but it's just been interesting looking at their schedule, thinking about that 3.5 game number that we talked about, and look at their state schedule and say, okay, here's their first. I'll read off the first 4 games for you just for a second. Southern Miss is their first games in Hattiesburg. Arizona State, Alcorn State, Northern Illinois. So that's their first 4 games. Let's just say they win those 3 games and lose to Arizona State. Then you look at the rest of their schedule, and it's just a bunch of SEC teams. So I would love for listeners to comment on your channel and say if there was a 4th win, where does it come from? I would just love to hear because there's a variety of SEC schools to choose from. So who would it be?
To be honest, if I had to answer, it would, and I've said this to Michael from the Vols Fanatic show. I think it might be perhaps that Tennessee game, first SEC game. It's at home in Starkville, and right now Tennessee's replacing all their skill positions at offense. Who knows if Aguilar is going to be the quarterback they need, or if it's going to be one of the freshmen taking over at that point. I would say just that first little bit before they really figure out who they are. Now, granted, before you, they've got Syracuse, they've got Georgia. You guys are game 5 for them. However, I'd also say, despite the weaker games in between those two in weeks 2 and 4, for me, I would say they could come and beat up or still trying to sort things out if it doesn't go well, against Syracuse or against Georgia. And sometimes when you're playing to figure out what works, it playing around doesn't work. And then sometimes it does. But for me, looking at the schedule, the number one place I would put it is that game against Tennessee. Of course, I'm not going to say you're going to come into the swamp and pull the upset, but stranger things have happened. I mean, 15 years ago, your last visit to the swamp, Dan Mullen beats Urban Meyer 10-7. So,
Ugly game. Ugly game.
yes, one of the ugliest that I've been to. Of course, now looking back, that might actually be more of a highlight than some other games I've been to, but is what it is. It's much better than going to Lexington to watch the team get blown out. That's for sure. Oh man. So, anyways, Landon, if anyone wants to check in and follow your stuff, where can they find you?
Yeah, man. Our show's on MPW Digital in Mississippi, but they have a obviously the podcast for Spotify and Apple and YouTube, and man, every Monday and Thursday in July. But in August, we go to 3 shows per week. So, man, we would love to have you over there because obviously we talk about Mississippi State, but we talk about all of the SEC, and certainly want them to be able to listen in anytime we're talking about the Gators, because we certainly got respect for Billy Napier and really like Billy Napier, and want that to work. And it looks like it's on a very positive trajectory this off season going into the new year as opposed to last year. So I think all state fans are rooting for him.
Yeah, we'll see how it works out for sure. But anytime you want to have me, just reach out. I'll gladly come on, talk about the Gators, and definitely hope to see you make a trip to Gainesville this fall.
Absolutely, man. Thank you guys so much for listening, for watching, all those things. College football is not that far away, so keep holding on.
For sure. And once again, thank you everyone for listening. And as always, go Gators.